see where this goes next. Okay, it looks like we've lost the audio connection with Mohammed. We'll bring him. Mohammed, did you hear that question? No. All right, we'll work on that connection and try and bring Mohammed back into this discussion. Let's keep going with this. So Israel and the U.S., we just saw in the last 24 hours, are not always aligned. At the start of the war, they both said we are operating almost as one army. The level of synchronization and just alignment on goals is very, very high. And then in the last few days, we've seen that twice now, Israel appears to have overstepped what the U.S. saw as limits in this war by striking Iran's oil depots in the capital, Tehran, and then by striking Iran's gas facilities. And both times there was either reporting or there was direct messaging from Donald Trump publicly that, hey, Israel, you shouldn't be doing this. How do you read that?
Well, we saw that, Cyril, even last September. If you remember the missile attack or the attack on Qatar, on Doha, right, by the Israelis, and the Americans had to sort of pull back from that and push them back, and that actually led to a ceasefire in Gaza. So I think that the longer the conflict goes on, Cyril, the more the opportunity is for deviation in terms of interest and deviation operationally to take place. In the beginning of the war, the reason you saw them working in lockstep is they expected the war to be over in a relatively short period of time, or at least the United States expected that. So if their goals seem to be the same, but the Iranians get a vote, right? The Iranians get a vote in terms of how this war, and what the Iranians did was basically inflict pain, economic pain on the United States, and inflict economic pain on the U.S. allies in the region, where we're sitting right now in Doha and elsewhere in the Gulf, in order to put pressure on Donald Trump to end this war. And there was no pressure put on Israel. The only pressure put on Israel were the missiles that were being launched from Tehran. But what Iran was trying to do is use an indirect strategy to do that. And it appears that the longer the war goes on, perhaps the more effective that strategy might be. And it reminds me of the Shakespeare quote of they that doth protest too much. And it appears from Secretary Hegseth, they're winning the war, they need $200 billion to kill the bad guys. There's a bit of bravado there. I think if there was confidence, they would be much more restrained.
There's bravado from everywhere on all sides, right? In all these parties, whether it's Israel, the U.S., Iran, it's bravado everywhere.
Well, that certainly is true. And the Iranians obviously have to worry about, overplaying their hand, but I think the U.S. does too in this case.
Mohammed Ali Shabani, we're thankful that you're back in this conversation. We fight through these connection issues sometimes. It's important to have these conversations, though. Look, I was just saying to you, I was suggesting to you, and you may agree or disagree with the premise of the question, that it seems like right now the parameters in the first 3 weeks of this war have been set. The U.S. and Israel are pounding Iran. Not much Iran can do about that. But Iran is closing the Strait of Hormuz and hurting the region and really many markets in the world. And there's not much that the U.S. and Israel seem able to do about that. So with these things set, that's like the structure of this conflict. Where does it go from there?
Well, I think fundamentally this conflict is about who can take the most pain the longest, rather than who can hit the hardest, so to speak. And I think in that sense, Donald Trump, I'm afraid, has much less patience than, say, Moshtaba Khamenei or whoever else is in charge in Tehran right now. I think Iran has experience of fighting 8 years of war throughout much of the 1980s. That's the kind of background Iran is coming from. Iran is a country that's had 30 years to prepare for this conflict. You see this in the structure of its military command, the mosaic defense strategy, this notion that each of the 30-plus provinces have separate commands. They've dug in. I think most people expected them to kind of fold in just a matter of days, and they haven't. Even though there's been leadership decapitation, thousands of strikes, not just by Israel, but also the United States, and still they're fighting back. And I think there's a number of factors explaining that. It's not just about political will. It's fundamentally about them viewing this as existential, right? This is a war that they cannot choose not to fight. Whereas for the United States, this is a war of choice. And that changes things a lot.
Mohammed, you just said that it seems many people expected Iran to fold in a couple of days. What does Iran's history, at least since the Islamic Revolution, teach us?
I think fundamentally it's about the different philosophies of war. I think if you look at the Western kind of philosophy of war, you have very much shock and awe, a lot of imagery, big explosions for live TV, kind of embedded media. It's a lot less kind of attention span if you compare it to, let's say, Eastern style of war, which looks at fundamentally attrition. It's about a war of attrition. Who can take the most punches the longest, rather than who can hit the hardest. And I think if you look at Iran's most recent history, the years of war with Iraq in the 1980s, they had a decade of war of attrition with Israel and Syria. These are guys that are not used to spectacular one-off shock and awe campaigns. These are guys who are used to fighting, sort of digging in, fighting in the trenches for years. And with someone like Donald Trump, it may actually work. And that doesn't mean that Iran is not going to get hurt in the process. Absolutely it will. But again, if you look at this in terms of the fundamentals, that for Iran, this is an existential war. Whereas for the United States, this is a war of choice. And this means there are parameters such as the possibility that Trump may just decide to declare victory and walk away. And that produces a lot of uncertainty, not just for Israel, but also many countries in the region, including the GCC states.
Ross, I'm really pressed for time, but I know you wanted a quick follow-up.
Yes. So, Iran has its roots in the Persian Empire that goes back thousands of years. Thousands of years also, the Chinese strategist Sun Tzu came out with exactly the kind of strategy that's mentioned here, an Eastern strategy, which is to use the opponent's weight against itself. And I think that's what Iran is trying to do.
Ross Harrison, citing Sun Tzu. Thank you very much to both of you, Mohammed Ali Shabani as well. I'm glad that connection came back up. It's great to have your insights and analysis. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.
Now, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and crucially Japan, whose representative, the Prime Minister, is at the White House, have all issued a joint statement on the Strait of Hormuz. They've condemned in the strongest terms Iran's attacks on commercial vessels in the Gulf and have called on the country to cease its threats, laying of mines, drone and missile attacks, and other attempts to block the strait. The six nations say that they are ready to contribute to what they describe as appropriate efforts to ensure safe passage through the strait, and go on to promise other steps to stabilize energy markets. These include working with certain producing nations to increase output. Al Jazeera's Natasha Butler is live from Paris. Natasha, we read parts of the statement, but I think we need some context, and we need you to walk us through it and what we learned today and what these countries are ready to do.
Well, the statement is full of the sort of diplomatic language you would expect from these countries. It's talking about a de-escalation of tensions that is needed. It's asking Iran to stop its strikes on those commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and also on any oil and civilian infrastructure. But what is interesting is you have these six countries talking about wanting to contribute to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the language used is actually quite vague. So when we were a little bit earlier in a French Foreign Ministry briefing here in Paris, I asked the spokesperson if he could give us any more details. Is a mission being planned, for example? Now, what he said is at the moment, these countries are in preparatory talks with other countries. He mentioned India. He didn't mention any others. He said the US is being briefed, but isn't necessarily taking part. But what he said was that these countries are looking at ways that they will be able to try and secure the Strait of Hormuz, although it doesn't seem as if anything is going to be happening in the coming days. In fact, we know that the French President Emmanuel Macron, a little earlier this week, has said that France would not participate in any mission until the situation was much calmer. It clearly isn't calm now. But this statement clearly shows that these countries are concerned about the escalation war, they are concerned about its human cost, and they are very concerned about those energy prices as they continue to go up.
Natasha Butler reporting live from Paris. Thank you very much, Natasha. And Japan's Prime Minister, as we mentioned, is holding talks on the Iran war with Donald Trump in Washington. Sanae Takaishi condemned Iran's attacks on regional neighbors and confirmed that they've been trying to reach out to Tehran over the disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. Tokyo is among several allies that Donald Trump says have been reluctant to assist in securing the strait.
I expect Japan to step up because, we have that kind of relationship, and we step up with Japan. Japan, China, Europe, parts of Europe, get a lot of their oil through the strait. We get none, practically. We're less than 1%. We don't have to be any percent. We don't even, I think we do it just to be nice. But we think of it, we don't use the strait. We're defending the strait for everybody else. And then in the case of NATO, they don't want to help us defend the strait, and they're the ones that need it.
Right now, the situation in the Middle East and the entire world is such that we are experiencing a severe security environment. And now the global economy is about to experience a huge hit because of these developments. But even against that backdrop, I firmly believe that it is you, Donald, who can achieve peace across the world. And to do so, I'm ready to reach out to many of the partners in the international community to achieve our objective together.
Well, Asian countries are directly impacted by this conflict. About 80% of the oil that usually passes through the strait would be headed to Asian markets. Japan and South Korea import more than 80% of their oil through the Strait of Hormuz. For India, it's about 37%. For China, around 25%. When shipping routes are under threat, these economies are especially exposed. The first impact of any disruption is higher prices. Every $10 increase in oil prices adds roughly $160 billion a year to the world's oil import bill. Joining me now from Los Angeles is to look at this is Robert Koepp, the director of the Asia Pacific Geoeconomics and Business Initiative at Chapman University. It's good to have you on the program. How can Asian economies ride this out? What I have in mind is that 80% number that we just gave. Countries like Japan that import more than 80% of their oil, so a vast majority from the Middle East, and right now they can't get it, or most of that they can't.
Emergency alert
How can we
message
possibly
detected.
ride this out?
Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 18:48 and 45 seconds. Hakarmal, Givat Wolfson, Megadim, Isfiya, Bitesvi, Vitorin, Kishan Prison. Blast Radius Network Command Center.
It would be far more problematic, and you'd have to see a rearrangement of oil supply chains.
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 18:48 and 36 seconds. Southern Golan, Hadnes, Kidmatsvi, Katsrin, Keshet, Onayam, Ramat, Yonatan.
Based on statements
Blast
out of
Radius
the White
Network
House
Command
and
Center.
from Secretary Hegseth, it seems like there's a lot of conviction from
Emergency
this
alert
administration
message
that
detected.
militarily they've already reached a certain
Rocket/missile
amount of their
alert March
objectives. I mean,
19,
from day one, Trump was already
2026,
saying
18:48
they've
and
accomplished
51
what they wanted
seconds.
to, but they're
Hayamakim,
going after a
Basmat
bigger
Taban,
political goal,
RAS
which
Ali,
I think, as your
ADI,
previous commentary
Hardov,
showed,
Nafit,
isn't going to be as
Sawith
easy as they
Humaria,
anticipated.
Kayabi.
So at some point,
Blast
it's gonna
Radius
be a matter
Network
of
Command
how much,
Center.
the U.S. is willing to keep this up. The pressure point is
Emergency
really
alert
in
message
Washington
detected.
more than anywhere else. This is
Rocket/missile
much
alert
more
March 19,
existential for Israel, and it's
2026,
fundamentally
18:48 and
existential for the regime in
24
Iran.
seconds.
So the
Upper
US is the
Galilee,
deciding factor
Katarim,
here, and I don't think the
Rama,
US is looking for a
Eliflet,
long-term engagement.
Biriyeh,
But even if the
Shezer,
US ends
Korazim
its
Beard
war
Hagali.
against
Blast
Iran,
Radius
as
Network
both
Command Center.
Hegseth and Donald Trump have said multiple times, Iran will still, for a long time, have the
Emergency
ability to
alert
spoil
message
the Strait of
detected.
Hormuz and
Rocket/missile
keep it
alert
closed
March
or
19,
almost entirely closed,
2026,
because it'll be easy for Iran.
18:48 and
They've
30
said this,
seconds.
right? It'll be
Center
easy for
Galilee,
Iran to lay a
Hareret
mine or
Yachad,
send a
Latham,
short-term
and
ballistic
Hamdan,
missile.
Kalanet,
So in other words,
Kfar Hanania,
if the Strait of
SC.
Hormuz remains closed,
Blast Radius
for
Network
the
Command
foreseeable
Center.
period of time, then how do economies like Japan and South Korea overcome that?
Intel
Well, I think this is
update.
exactly where they could step in. So, right, as
Intel
long as it's
update.
a really hot conflict, they're restricted.
OSINT warfare.
constitutionally and
The
by,
IRGC has released
acts of
footage
their
showing the
various
interception
departments.
of a U.S.
South Korea absolutely
F-35
has to
stealth
have an
multi-role
actual assembly
fighter,
prove
possibly
any
using
sort
a
of
domestic
military
surface-to-air
deployment.
missile,
Japan,
SAM.
Under this
Pick.
administration, the Takaichi prime ministership, perhaps a little more
I see.
flexibility, but very unlikely to deploy what Trump's been asking for, which is like minesweepers. They can do other things, but to your point, where Asia, particularly Japan and South Korea, could play a role because they are indeed so dependent on the oil supply, as well as having very capable maritime forces, they could come in and kind of help keep the peace. It'd be more of a peacekeeping thing. They would have to step in and broker some sort of deal where there would be a ceasefire, which Iran has been willing to engage in, and they're also Iran is very dependent on relations with, in particular, Japan. So that could be possible. That would be kind of their ultimate strategic move here, I think.
When do you think the Japanese, South Koreans start to really feel the impact of this?
Well, I think they're already feeling the impact. The problem is, like I said, there's not a lot they can do other than sort of suck it up. But it's not to the point of really kind of catastrophically derailing their economies. That would happen, say, if this went beyond 2 months. I think that would, beyond 2 months, and when you're looking at oil at, say, $140 a barrel level consistently, if that happens, then I think you're going to see the East Asian economies, particularly the two biggest of the democratic powers, Japan and South Korea, plus China. China is also affected. So I think altogether, you might see an interesting combination where they'd say to Washington, look, you've got to do something differently. We've got to stop this, at least temporarily. And that's when they'd step up, particularly, again, Japan and South Korea, but even China in that case could play a role potentially.
And, you know, moments ago, we heard from the Japanese Prime Minister, Sanae Takaishi. She was sitting next to Donald Trump, and she seemed to be already taking a step in that direction, saying, quote, the global economy is about to experience a huge hit, her words, a huge hit because of this current security environment. Robert Kep, thank you so much for joining us on Al Jazeera.
Thank you.
4 Palestinian women, 2 of them heavily pregnant, have been killed after shrapnel struck a beauty salon in the occupied West Bank. 9 people were wounded, 2 critically. That's shrapnel from an Iranian missile attack. The victims were preparing to celebrate Eid al-Fitr on Thursday night. The Palestinian Civil Defense Agency says that Israeli air defenses intercepted a missile, and that debris is what hit the salon. Nida Ibrahim reports from Beit Awa in the occupied West Bank.
This is the moment of impact. Lives ended in seconds.
Can you see here? The metal has melted in the heat.
Rizq Masalme heard the explosion, then the screaming. He assumed they were screams of panic.
They told me there were injured people inside. I went in using my flashlight. What I saw was a catastrophe. Blood, body parts. I saw a little girl, so I carried her out and called for more help. People were in shock. Some didn't know what to do.
The toddler is 3.5 years old. She survived. Her mother, Amal, did not. She was 6 months pregnant. Amal was among a group of women getting ready to celebrate Eid al-Fitr. This small nail salon, now a scene of tragedy. The town is in mourning. Those who made it out alive did so with injuries. Some lost their limbs. It's not clear if the shrapnel came from an Iranian missile or an Israeli interceptor, but Palestinian authorities say evidence points to Israeli interceptors. Israel does not disclose the location of its air defense systems, but many are situated between Palestinian villages. People here have no shelters, no safe zones, no defense systems, and no guidance on what to do or where to go during an attack.
Many here say they often hear and see interceptions. Just in the last few seconds, we've also heard loud explosion sounds. Palestinians say they are caught in the middle of this war, and illegal Israeli settlements across the occupied West Bank make them even more vulnerable to these attacks.
Since the US and Israel launched their offensive, authorities have recorded at least 189 incidents of missile fragments and debris falling in Palestinian communities. These latest deaths are only increasing fears, posing questions about safety, but no answers. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera, Beit Awa, the occupied West Bank.
Very briefly, 2 other stories making headlines. At least 16 people have been killed in a storm in Pakistan's largest city, Karachi. The extreme weather brought powerful winds, toppling walls and buildings. Rescue crews are still searching for victims trapped under the rubble. Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt has reopened for a small number of people. Several ambulances were seen waiting to evacuate patients. The crossing is seen as a lifeline for Palestinians. It had been closed since Israel and the U.S. attacked Iran last month. The closure has stalled medical evacuations and prevented Palestinians from returning to Gaza. We're going to take a very short break, but do stay with us. The news continues at the top of the hour on Al Jazeera with our continuing coverage of the U.S.-Israel war against Iran. We'll be live across the region.
As the war on Iran escalates, Al Jazeera's correspondents are on the ground.
This is the first time that President Trump has spoken publicly live.
We projected 4 to 5 weeks.
All the while insisting that the United States has plenty of weapons left.
We have only just begun.
Still, he's not ruling out sending U.S. troops into Iran.
We expect to take additional losses.
Today, we grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action.
That is a price Americans say they do not want repeated.
Stay with Al Jazeera for the latest developments.
Can you really bomb a political future into existence?
I don't think that's what we're trying to do. I think the objective here is to destroy the instruments of Iranian state power.
Let me ask you this directly. Is Israel effectively leading U.S. foreign policy?
They want to do a Gaza-like effort on the main power centers in Iran to kill thousands of people, not just the core.
Upfront tackles the big issues, only on Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera.
That's because the whole stadium's air-conditioned.
Wherever you are.
Seats, down to the pitch. Fans did give former Spanish international Xavi.
Hello, I'm Cyril Vanier, and you're watching Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran. Qatar calls Iranian strikes on its gas facilities a dangerous escalation and demands it ends its attacks on the Gulf state. Iran keeps targeting Israel. Missiles hit an oil refinery in the northern port city of Haifa and Ashdod. Israeli officials contradict President Donald Trump's claim that the U.S. did not know about its plan to attack Iran's South Pars gas field. And Trump meets with Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaishi as he continues to pressure allies to assist in securing the Strait of Hormuz. 20 days in, and the Iran war has entered an energy infrastructure phase. Israeli forces attacked the South Pars gas field, and there has been retaliatory Iranian strikes on energy facilities across the Gulf region. The United States and Israel continue to press ahead with their attacks on Iran as the dangers and costs of the war spiral. Iran's army says that it will completely destroy the energy sites of U.S. allies in the region if its own facilities are attacked again. Qatar says that there is extensive damage at Ras Laffan, that is the world's largest liquefied natural gas production facility, after Iran's overnight attacks. And Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, says Iran has destroyed the nation's trust with its aggression.
This war needs to stop immediately. The aggression needs to stop immediately, because everyone knows who is the big beneficiary of the war and dragging the whole region into this conflict. Unfortunately, what is happening now is serving those agendas.
Al Jazeera is live from the White House, from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and from Tehran. First, though, we go to Dmitry Medvedenko. He's here in Doha, monitoring developments across the Gulf. So, Dmitry, in the last 24 hours, Iran targeted or hit energy sites in Qatar, in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. How much damage have they done?
A lot, Cyril. We first heard the comment that the damage that's been done to the Ras Laffan facility, which is the largest LNG production and export facility in the world, was extensive. Now we have numbers, because the CEO of Qatar Energy, Saad Al-Kaabi, has talked to Reuters and given some numbers. 17% of Qatar's LNG exports have been affected by this one series of attacks on Ras Laffan. This translates to up to $20 billion of lost annual revenue. Not just one sum, but every year the government here in Qatar is going to be losing up to $20 billion in lost revenue. Now, this facility has so-called 14 trains of LNG production. These are basically just separate units of the facility. 2 of them have been damaged. These are very complex structures which take years to build. These are joint projects with ExxonMobil and with Royal Dutch Shell. And this is the damage that we're receiving. It's affecting 12.8 million tons of liquefied natural gas, or LNG. And it has set back, according to the CEO of Qatar Energy, it set back the region 10 to 20 years in progress. Now, the country has already announced force majeure in the shorter term because it's not exporting any LNG due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz at the moment. But now it will have to, it says, declare force majeure in the long term. So contracts up to 5 years long on deliveries of LNG to Belgium, Italy, South Korea, and China. It looks like they're going to be affected. This is immense financial damage for the country and for the company.
Dmitry, Iran has succeeded in almost entirely shutting off the flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. As they did that, Gulf countries, Middle East countries were looking for a plan B to reroute their energy through another passage, right? And it appears now that Iran is also attacking that rerouting, those new routes to export the energy. What are you seeing there?
That's correct. So in the Gulf region, there's only 3 countries that have alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz when it comes to exporting their energy. That's Saudi Arabia, which has an east-west pipeline leading to the Red Sea ports, which it has been using. Yanbu port over there has come under attack in the past couple of days. These are the reports that we've been seeing, that at least it has been targeted. The extent of the damage is unclear for now, but it looks like it is controlled.
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 19 o'clock and 45 seconds. Confrontation line. Rocket-alert.live.
3 weeks.
Blast radius network command center.
Iran is basically hitting where it hurts, not just attacking oil and gas facilities across the Gulf within the Strait of Hormuz and blocking
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 18:50 and 6 seconds. Southern Golan, Natur Hayamakim, Kaabiyita Bash Hakarmal, Atlat, Kishanpi. Blast radius network command center.
From the reports that I've seen are basically through the roof. They're almost double what it costs normally.
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 18:50 and 15 seconds. Southern Golan, Natur rocket-alert.live. Blast radius network command center.
A day, which is basically 1/10 of what the UAE has when it comes to Fujairah port in the UAE.
And Dmitry Medvedenko reporting in Doha. Thank you.
Emergency alert message detected.
Iran's
Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 19 o'clock and 54 seconds. Confrontation line. Rocket-alert.live. Blast radius network command center.
That power was restored. Initial assessments showed parts of an Iranian cluster munition hit that refinery. Tehran said the attack was in retaliation.
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 18:49 and 51 seconds. Southern Golan, Hadnes, Kidmatsvi, Katsrin, Industrial Zone, Katsrin, Kes.
There was damage
Blast radius network command center.
And the center of Israel. Now, let's just revisit what those two things
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 19 o'clock and 33 seconds. Confrontation line. Rocket-alert.live. Blast radius network command center.
Hitting that oil refinery, hitting the electricity company is very significant and very disruptive. The center of Israel overall, which has been
emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 18:50. Southern Golan, Natur Upper Galilee, Sha'arna Amman Industrial Zone, Yasser. Blast radius network command center.
Sirens from rockets coming in from Lebanon, fired by Hezbollah are nonstop, and that is also causing damage in northern communities.
Emergency alert
4
message
injuries
detected.
in Kiryat Shmoni over
Rocket/missile
the past hour,
alert
2
March
of them
19,
described as
2026,
critical,
18:50 and 12 seconds.
just in the
Southern
past hour
Golan,
or so.
Natur Hayamakim,
Stay with us.
Kaebi Tabash Hakarmal,
From the Iranian
Atlet,
capital, Tehran.
Kishan P.
So, Ali,
Blast
the
Radius
IRGC
Network
has
Command Center.
confirmed that they hit Ashdod in Israel, Ashdod and Haifa, as Noor was reporting. What else?
Emergency alert message detected. Rocket/missile alert March 19, 2026, 19 o'clock and 36 seconds. Confrontation line. Dove rocket alert.live. Blast Radius Network Command Center.
The Iranians are saying that this is in retaliation to the attacks on the southern Pars facilities in Asaluye. Now, it seems for today that Iran has also announced that the IRGC announced that they've hit one F-35 aircraft above Iran in the Midlands of Iran, without saying what happened later. We have the story from the American sources, at least what we heard about a plane, F-35 plane, having to do emergency landing. So these are mainly the lines coming from Tehran. Also, we heard of several airstrikes around the country. In Tehran, there were several airstrikes heard. And it seems things are still going in this regard of escalation. Minister of Foreign Affairs said that the retaliation to the attack of Asaluye and the southern Pars facility took place in this way. And if there is any strike or any attack on Iran's infrastructure, Iran would retaliate once again.
Ali Hashem in Tehran, thank you very much. And Israeli officials say Wednesday's strike on Iran's South Pars gas facilities was, quote, coordinated with the U.S., but is unlikely to be repeated. Now, that comes despite U.S. President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social hours earlier that Washington had no prior knowledge of that attack. Iran responded with strikes on energy installations across the Gulf. So back to Noor O'Day, who is again live from Ramallah. Noor, Donald Trump says one thing. Israel, hours later, we understand, in direct contradiction to what Trump has said, they're saying, actually, no, there was coordination. There was foreknowledge. The U.S. knew that we were going to hit this target. What do you know?
Well, we know, Cyril, that Israel was adamant from the beginning that the U.S. knew that this was coordinated and that the U.S. consented. Now, operationally, it's impossible to imagine a scenario where any fighter jet would be flying in that area, in that combat zone, without the U.S. knowing about it, because it may run the risk of being shot down. That's operationally. Politically, Israel knew and treated this strike as something strategic, as a game changer. So it wouldn't have done this without tipping off the U.S. administration at the very least. In any case, the Israeli politicians are adamant. There was coordination, there was U.S. consent, despite what the U.S. president is saying. At the end, what seemed like an attempt to not make the U.S. president very upset. They said, well, it is unlikely that such an attack would repeat, that this was a message to Tehran, and that they believe that Tehran is drawing the proper conclusions. We don't know what that means. But again, that's not very far away from what Donald Trump said at the end of that message, in which he denied prior knowledge, when he said that if Tehran does not open the Strait of Hormuz, then he might just sanction more strikes. So we're in this strange place of politics and relations, Cyril, where we hear a lot of things, but at the end we have to rely on these statements and what we can see and report with our own eyes.
Yeah, Noor O'Day, thank you very much for your reporting from Ramallah there in the occupied West Bank. We're going to stay with this topic of U.S.-Israel alignment a little longer. Speaking a little earlier in the Oval Office, Donald Trump said that his coordination with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is generally strong, but not aligned at all times. Listen to this.
Have you talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields?
Yeah, I did. I told him don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
So Kimberly Halkett joins us from the White House. Kimberly, in typical Trump fashion, he sort of says everything in the sense that everything seems to be true at the same time. They're very coordinated. He told him not to do it, but at the same, he didn't do it, but he kind of did do it anyway. You know, it is a little bit all over the place.
Yeah, what this statement tells us, just like the president's Truth Social post you referenced earlier, that there is friction within the U.S.-Israeli coalition. What it signals is that the U.S. president did speak to the Israeli prime minister following that strike on that shared gas field between Iran and Qatar. And what he said is basically, look, don't do that. But it's clear that Israel is acting on its own timeline and its own priorities. So this really highlights militarily a clear divergence between the U.S. and the Israeli priorities. But it also, what Donald Trump is saying, as you point out, where he's saying multiple things at the same time, is that he's trying to distance himself from the actions of Israel politically, really a message to ordinary Americans, because what he's trying to do is reassure Americans who are already not in support of this conflict that Israel isn't in charge, and in turn drawing the United States further into a conflict that Americans don't want.
Kimberly, Donald Trump has the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaishi over at the White House right now. Of course, the context here is the Iran war. The context is that Japan gets 80% of its oil that comes from the Middle East. Normally that goes through the Strait of Hormuz. All of that's closed. So they're not getting that oil. And Donald Trump has argued in recent days that countries that have the most to lose with this conflict are the countries that should help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. What's he saying about that today? And do we know if Japan is going to jump in and help reopen the strait?
Well, it's pretty clear that right now Japan is not going to jump in. What we've had is a joint statement from European as well as leaders as well as Japan signaling that there is political support, but there is not military support. Now, we don't know what happened in the Oval Office once the cameras were left and turned off, rather. But what we do know is that it's very clear there's a lot of pressure domestically on the Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi, that this is also unpopular in Japan. We also know that militarily there is a constitutional requirement that Japan's military be used for defense, primarily, not for offense. So there is a constitutional issue that makes it difficult for her to agree to this coalition. So again, what this is signaling and what we can take from her statements is that she's in support of the United States in its efforts. She says she doesn't believe Iran should have a nuclear weapon, that the Japanese foreign minister spoke with the Iranian foreign minister, and that there was a need for de-escalation. But again, when it comes to that coalition, there has been no public pledge that has been made on the part of Japan to send warships to secure the strait.
Kimberly, something else I want to play for our viewers, and I know that, you know, Kimberly's ears will have definitely perked up when she heard that, as did mine, I think, as did many people who were watching at that time. So during the press conference, Donald Trump was asked why he didn't notify any of America's allies before the attack on Tehran. Now, remember, he was sitting next to the Japanese Prime Minister while he was being asked that question. This was his response.
One thing, you don't want to signal too much. You know, when we go in, we went in very hard, and we didn't tell anybody about it because we wanted surprise. Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay? Why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay? Right? You know, he's asking me, no, you believe in surprise, I think, much more so than us.
Kimberly, I'm hoping, look, Donald Trump has said many things in the Oval Office, especially in his second term, as he has received in this setting, like what we've just seen, world leaders. Everybody remembers Zelensky, but there have been others. I have the Ghanaian president in mind. You know, my point is that Donald Trump has said many things that have been quite embarrassing to his guests. I think this has got to rank in the top 10, top 5. I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, what we know about the U.S. president is that there's no filter. And this is another example of that. What we had was a jarring diplomatic moment that occurred between two U.S. ally and Japan, or rather, the United States and Japan, two allies. This is particularly sensitive given the historical nature of the relationship. And so what you heard there was audible silence after the U.S. president made that historical reference, because it really didn't land well if it was supposed to be a joke, because the fact of the matter is that this really crossed into awkward diplomatic territory. But the core message that Donald Trump was trying to say is, yeah, I make no apologies for not letting Japan or any other ally know what we were doing, because I wanted to keep the tactical advantage of surprise militarily. And so he's justifying this, but at the same time, it is not only historically and diplomatically awkward, but it's also insensitive for another reason, and that is, again, because Japan, as you point out, gets more than 80% of its oil imports from flowing through the Strait of Hormuz. It had a need to know that information, and the U.S. chose to leave it out.
Kimberly Halkett, as always, we appreciate your reporting from the White House. Thank you very much. Now, back to our top story. Qatar's state energy company is warning that it's going to take 3 to 5 years to repair the damage that Iranian attacks have caused to its facilities. The CEO of Qatar Energy, Saad Al-Kaabi, said that liquefied natural gas exports will drop by about 17% because of the destruction. He went on to say, "Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that Qatar and the region would come under such an attack, especially from a brotherly Muslim country in the month of Ramadan." To discuss this further, joining me in the studio is Ross Harrison, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Long day for you, but we appreciate it. Thank you, Ross. And you're also the author of Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. And we have Negar Mortasavi joining us. Thank you very much. You are a Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Center for International Policy. I wanted to ask both of you how much of an escalation you thought it was. So it was around last night, local time, less than 24 hours ago, when we heard, okay, Iran has done it, and it has had a direct hit on Qatar's LNG, liquefied natural gas. A reminder to all our viewers, that is where Qatar gets all its money and wealth from. And another piece of important context here, Qatar and Iran share this gas field, right, which is underground, and it's stretched over Iran's territory and Qatar's territory. And they've always had this relationship of we share this major
OSINT warfare. It was hit but not brought down.
Iran has attacked Qatar on this. What did you think when you heard that?
OSINT warfare, if it's going to be hit anyway, might as well go for a Su-57 instead of wasting money.
But an escalation from Israel, not from Qatar.
Exactly. So Israel hit the major gas, which is also the one, the Pars field in Iran is also shared with Qatar, which I think has an indirect effect of trying to pull Qatar, one of Iran's closest allies in the GCC, more into the war, which I think is part of the Israeli strategy. The more the neighbors get entangled and the more the war spreads, I think this is better for, or at least the goal for Benjamin Netanyahu. And from the Iranian side, yes, this took it to the next level, but it's not a surprise, as in this is not something they hadn't talked about. They had warned it's going to be eye for eye. Civilian infrastructure, gas, water. They did try to also hit Israel, because that's a question I get asked a lot in the region, why they don't attack Israel or the U.S. They can't. They don't have a lot of options.
And they just did in the last couple of hours. Ashdod and Haifa, they hit energy facilities there.
Indeed. But I think the Iranian strategy, not to justify, but to explain it, the Iranian strategy is to try to expand and spread the pain, and to put pressure on some of these allies, friends and non-friends. You know, Qatar could be as close as Oman and Qatar in the GCC. To try to have this then indirectly pressure the White House. Also, the pressure on the global market is part of the strategy. Oil prices in the global market, eventually gas prices in the U.S., because that's the one aspect of this war that you can't analyze and say we're winning. U.S. consumers go to the pump, they see the price, there's no analyzing that. And that's, I think, part of the strategy of how to put pressure on the U.S. public, then on the president, essentially the U.S., to end this war. And it's a very unpopular war in the U.S., as we see in every poll.
it looks a little bit like a race to the bottom, right? Israel and the U.S. hitting Iran as much as they can, inflicting as much damage. It's military, yes, but it goes beyond the military. They've hit civilian infrastructure, they've hit the political leadership, the IRGC, of course, the army, et cetera, et cetera. Meanwhile, as we've explained, Iran is saying, okay, I'm going to drag the region down with me. The thing that makes this region rich, the thing that you build your economies on, we're going to choke that off. You're going to have to do without it for as long as we decide. That's where we are so far. Who wins, Ross, that race to the bottom? Is it even possible to say?
Well, I think there's different metrics of winning. I think for the Iranians, it's basically survival and a regeneration of their deterrence that they believe they lost after the June war, where they complied with the ceasefire and were then perceived as weak and vulnerable, and that took us to this moment now. So I think for them, winning is basically the regime survives, and they can create enough pain that any kind of future, this administration in Washington, or even a future administration, and Israel will think twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times before doing this ever again. And but I think we have to look at the attacks, and I think Nagar was getting on with that, which is look at the attacks on the oil infrastructure, the energy infrastructure here, also combined with the attacks on Iran's leadership, right? I mean, because what's happening is it appears that what Israel wants is to close off any possible off-ramp, diplomatic off-ramp, and any kind of negotiating partner. And that we'll see in the ensuing days, but that may create some distance between the United States and Israel, because it seems, given what we heard from the Japanese prime minister and what the Trump administration is hearing, that there's pressure building. And the thing I think is important to keep in mind is
pressure building on who?
On Washington. Because if you keep in mind, I think Israel is a regional actor, and they have regional interest, and they've been preparing for this war for arguably for 30 years. And they have less, what happens in the Gulf means, I mean, it should mean something to them, frankly, but I think in their calculus it does not. But it does matter to Washington, and it's not just the Gulf, it's Japan, it's Turkey, it's the entire globe that is feeling the pain of this. So I think the purpose on the Iranian side is to create enough pressure that it divides at some point, as the war, we talked about this earlier, as the war goes on, create some divisions between the United States and Israel.
Nagar, when you listen to Israel, they continue to say the same thing. We are going to hit Iran so hard, and strategically we're going to choose our targets so that we're going to weaken the clerical, military, and security establishments so that there can be an uprising of the Iranian people, and they can essentially change the political system in the country. For the moment, we've seen, correct me if I'm wrong, no sign of that, no indication of that. Can that happen?
I mean, we haven't seen, and we didn't see in the June war. I think this is just a formula or a narrative that doesn't make a lot of sense. We come from the sky, and somehow people rise up from the ground, and none of that happened. And I think it's natural when you're running away as a civilian from bombs falling, not just on military targets, but also on civilian infrastructure. One of the first targets was an elementary school. Let's not forget about that. You know, thousands of civilians across the region have been killed, hundreds of them children. And I just don't see this formula working. But I don't think that's the only Israeli goal. I think eventually, and this is something Benjamin Netanyahu has been asking on the record, off the record, of various U.S. administrations, this war on Iran is a regime change war to bring down the system or weaken it into a failed state, potentially multiple states, just defang Iran and remove this threat that is seen as, you know, a main enemy in the region. And the war is very popular in Israel, I would also add, unlike in the U.S. I agree with Ross, because I think the administration in the U.S. seems to be having a problem with messaging. The war is unpopular. It seems to be getting even more unpopular as it goes forward. And there are 3 questions. What, why, when? What is this? Is this a war or a limited military excursion? Why? What is the reason? Was it the nuclear program? Wasn't that obliterated? Is Iran a threat? How come the top counterterrorism official just resigned, saying Iran poses no threat? This is a war started with pressure from Israel. And when? When is this ending? Was it a couple of days? Was this a Venezuela model? Is it going to be a few weeks? Is it a few months? Boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. So I think the confusion in the White House is really leaking out. And this is, as Ross said, part of the pressure coming from allies here who are feeling the pain, and then also all the way through Europe and in Asia.
You know, there's another point, I think. Oh, sorry.
I'm going to have to run, but go ahead. Just a few seconds.
I think what's also important, Israel is a country that was born in 1948. The United States was born in 1776. Iran goes back to the Persian Empire thousands of years. So there's a nationalism as well. And when you attack the leadership, which is unpopular, you also attack the state. and you attack the people, you're going to get a response, and you're not going to get the response that the U.S. or Israel expected. Eventually.
Ross Harrison and Nigar Mortazavi, thank you very much. I like how you framed it, which is really a version of the questions that we've been asking, at least from the U.S. point. What are we looking at? When does this end? And how? Like, how does this end? I think I forgot a why in there.
Why?
Maybe there's a couple more questions. There's
why,
a why.
what, and when. Yeah.
Exactly.
You should keep asking those questions, yeah.
I think everybody's asking those questions at that point. And, you know, we listen keenly for clues in those press briefings, whether it's from Donald Trump, of course, or his spokespeople at this point, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio. Anyway, thank you very much to both of you for joining us. We appreciate it. All right, we take a short break. Do stay with us. Next on Al Jazeera is Inside Story.
The latest news as it breaks.
The situation looks to be far from de-escalation as the continuous exchange of fire remains the reality on the ground.
With detailed coverage.
As U.S. casualties mount from the growing conflict with Iran, 3/4 of Americans say that the country should be cautious of regime change wars.
From around the world.
Evacuation orders were issued for this town, but it was just a few minutes after that 10 Israeli strikes targeted the town.
Hearing the facts.
A busy day for Iran today could mean when Iran retaliates, it will be a busy day for cities in the Gulf.
Asking questions.
How much damage can this conflict really inflict on the global economy?
Reporting from the action.
This is the third time the Israeli military has targeted an area outside Hezbollah's traditional strongholds.
With the latest global news and insightful documentaries, Al Jazeera's teams across the world bring you closer to the heart of the story.
Israel assassinated Iran's supreme leader on the first day of the war, killing senior military, intelligence and political figures afterwards. For decades, assassination has been Israeli policy. But what has the strategy achieved, and is it becoming normalized? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. Killing the leader of a country on day one might once have been seen as breaking the unwritten rules of war, if history is anything to go by. But that's exactly what Israel has done in Iran, assassinating Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and other senior figures this month. For decades, Israel has targeted people at home and abroad. Inside Israel, assassination by state agents is broadly viewed with pride. Western cinema and TV glamorize Israeli state-sponsored killing. Brave and cunning hitmen and women always get their target in the end. Allies rarely criticize the tactic. The US has applauded the attacks with no opposition from the UK and from the EU foreign policy chief. But what has Israel's policy of assassination achieved over the years? And is it becoming normalized with other countries following suit? We'll ask our guests in just a moment, but first this report from Alexandra Byers.
Israel and the U.S. assassinated Iran's supreme leader alongside members of his family in the very first strikes of this war. Since then, they've killed military commanders, security chiefs, and political figures, making it clear that any senior figure is a target, including the new supreme leader.
I wouldn't issue life insurance policies on any of the leaders.
No one in Iran has immunity and everyone is in the crosshairs. We will continue to thwart and hunt them all.
Israel's policy of targeted assassinations dates back decades and stretches across the region. But in recent years, it's shifted into overdrive. In Lebanon, Israel killed Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah in a major attack in Beirut in 2024. His successor just a few days later. Then there's Hamas in Gaza. The group's political chief Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in July 2024. The Israeli defense minister confirmed Israeli forces tracked him to the Iranian capital and planted a bomb that lay for weeks, waiting for his arrival. Yet those and other attacks on senior Palestinian leaders have failed to end armed resistance to Israeli occupation. Similarly, in Lebanon, Hezbollah fighters have redeployed to the southern border, battling Israeli troops, and the group has launched waves of missiles into Israel in recent weeks.
We've prepared ourselves for a long confrontation, and they will be surprised in the field. The enemy's threats do not frighten us, and the enemy will see our might.
Iran is also defiant. The foreign minister says the assassinations have no effect on his country's power structure.
We have not had anyone more important than the leader himself, and even the leader was martyred. Yet the system continued to work and immediately provided a replacement. If anyone else is martyred, it will be the same.
Israel has proved it can kill the individuals, but not the ideology. But with the policy intensifying, actively supported by the US and other allies, the question is whether Israel's tactic of state killing is now becoming normalized. Alexandra Byers, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss this further with our panel of guests on today's Inside Story. And joining us from Boston, Rami Khouri, a distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut. In Haifa, Ilan Pappé, an Israeli historian, author and chairperson of the Nakba Memorial Foundation. And in Swansea in Wales, Luca Trenta, an associate professor at Swansea University, he specialises in covert action and state-sponsored assassinations. Let me start with you, if I may, Rami. If we look at the way this war is being fought, you could say that it's a war, or one of the things you could say is it's a war by assassination. In fact, multiple assassinations.
Yes, you could say that, and it's because the Israelis have tried many, and the Americans, many different tactics in the various wars that they've fought against various people in the region, and they haven't been able to achieve their political goals or their strategic goals. So they're relying more now, as we've seen in the Gaza genocide and what's happening in Lebanon, the West Bank, they're relying more on just savagery, destruction, creating wastelands of these areas, destroying civilian life, foundations, as a way to try to get their opponents, whether they're Iranians or Palestinians or Lebanese, to get them to surrender. But the Israelis, who are a very talented people, are totally blind to the realities in front of them, which is that when you subjugate people and threaten them and occupy them and kill them and ethnically cleanse them and starve them and freeze their babies to death, the people resist. They fight back. They don't give up, just as historically the Jews have done many times in history. So yes, they're using these assassination techniques because they don't know what else to do, I think. And the other side is that the Palestinians and the Iranians have learned the lesson of this, and the Lebanese, and they've adjusted their situation, their security, their progression from one leadership to another, all their tactics and strategies, they've adjusted. And therefore you see that now with Hezbollah back in action and the Iranians still in action. So the Israelis have to really be a lot smarter in how they wage these wars and realize that the best weapon they have is to make a peace treaty.
Ilan Pappé, you are one of Israel's best-known historians, so the right person to answer this question. I mean, this is a signature Israeli policy, is it not? Going back decades, either bombardment by the IDF, the Israeli military, or operations by the Secret Service Mossad. Israel has been assassinating people, and I'm
Intel
careful
update.
to use that word because others, particularly
Department
Israel,
of War, RT by Adept of War. We will not stop until the mission is complete.
Is the right word
Pick.
because it's they're not always targeted. In fact, we've seen it in the war in Iran. There are civilians dying each time too.
Yeah, absolutely. There is a long history of this policy of assassination going back to the 1940s, the first time that officially the Zionist leadership, that is in the pre-state period, was authorizing its agents, its troops to target Palestinian leadership, not just military leadership, journalists, political leaders, was already then in 1946, believing then as they believe now that if you target the elite, whether it's a political or cultural, social elite, you subjugate more easily the society as a whole to your plans of occupation, colonization, and so on. What is, of course, incredible is that since 1946, again and again, this assassination policy proved to be a total failure. It never achieved what it was declared to achieve, and yet there seems to be no process of learning in the Israeli policymakers, which makes you think that it's not anymore about really believing that it achieves anything in terms of defeating the enemy, so to speak. And it's much more for domestic consumption, trying to give kind of evidence of success in a war and wars that Israel has no chance in the world of succeeding.
And in this particular case, assassination seems to have determined the timing of the start of this whole war.
Yes, they do look for opportunities to kill leaders or leaderships, and that can, in a way, determine a more strategic decision to go to war, like we've seen in this particular war. But I do think, as you mentioned yourself, this is not always done within the context of war. Through clandestine and other kind of covert operation, this is all the time part of the method or methodology that Israel is using, trying to defeat ideas, the spirit of people, the wish to be liberated, not to live under occupation and ethnic cleansing, and lately genocide, and totally disregard for the fact that, as Rami rightly said, not only that it does not achieve the goal of defeating the spirit of those who are colonized or occupied, in many ways it creates in them the sense that there's no other way but to continue the resistance and the military and armed struggle, because Israel doesn't convey any message of peace or reconciliation through that policy of assassination and killing.
Luca, you are an expert in assassination. So tell me, I mean, for many years around the world, the idea of assassinating political leaders, particularly heads of state in a war, was seen as somewhat of a taboo, was it not?
Yes, there was a sense in which killing state leaders was somewhat different than other types of assassination. We said already that Israel has had a long history of assassination, of targeting terrorist leaders, suspected terrorists, at times even scientists working for some of the historical enemies of Israel. But heads of state were often considered somewhat of a different kettle of fish, something different altogether. Although this does not mean that states, including Israel and including the United States, have not tried in the past, but they try to do it either secretly, for example, as the United States did in the early Cold War, or in more recent times, for example, in the Second Cold War. They would try to do it by finding very stretched and at times implausible legal justifications to do so.
Rami, I mean, this is clearly illegal, is it not? Well, certainly the war is clearly illegal because it's a breach of the UN Charter. What about assassinating leaders like this? Because there's somewhat of a grey area, isn't there? The supreme leader of Iran in the Iranian constitution happens to be in command of all of the armed forces of Iran. Worth stating, the same applies to Donald Trump. He is the commander-in-chief of the United States.
Well, you could argue that. I think some people might try to argue that, but the reality, the bigger picture here is that as Israel has, and the pre-state Zionist movements, as Ilan mentioned, and then the pre-state ones killed British, they killed UN people, mediators, they killed Palestinian leaders, they killed cultural leaders, not just, fighters. The Israeli government, before embarking on this assassination campaign recently, they assassinated international law. They assassinated the mechanisms of global orderly life, of how states live with each other and how they have certain rights that they have to respect. The American-Israeli assault and the genocide especially has wiped that out, and very few people now feel they have to follow the law. They can do anything they want because they're going to be able to get away with it. The second point I'd make here is that the Israelis don't seem, and the Americans don't seem to grasp that the people they're fighting with, which is the Iranian government and people, the Lebanese Hezbollah, and the Palestinians, Hamas and others, they're all in a situation where they feel that they're in an existential battle for survival, that they have to fight or they are wiped off the map, and they will not allow themselves to be wiped off the map. They've been fighting for 100 years, and they're going to continue to do that. But the nature of their determination has shaped them now with the adjustments that they've all made to absorb the assassinations, absorb the destruction and all the cutting off of electricity and water and food. They've taken precautions because they have to keep resisting and causing pain to the other side to bring them at some point to a point where they end the war and try to resolve their differences in other ways. But the Israelis don't seem to want to resolve differences with Iranians and Palestinians and Lebanese peacefully. They want to impose their hegemonic superiority and control on the region. They want to be surrounded by vassals and supplicants only. And therefore, any approach that people try to use with the Israelis is going to crash on the Israeli determination to assert their priority and supremacy over everybody else in the region.
Ilan, you heard Luca there tell us that this, for a time in history, killing leaders had become a taboo, but it's not been a taboo in Israel, is it? I mean, this is something that has sort of become glorified in Israel, and then that's been magnified by Hollywood, all the television programs and euphemisms of Israel, another euphemism, taking out people.
Yes, well, first of all, there is a difference, I think, between the current Israeli political elite and government and the previous ones. I think those of the 20th century were very careful to do these things far more clandestinely. And killing missions and assassinations were not that overt and clear. This particular messianic political elite that Israel has does not know any boundaries at all, and therefore it regards its right to kill and assassinate leaders as part of its more kind of general perspective of the period in history that we are living in, according to their understanding, which is a rare window in which you can recreate the greater Israel that they read about in the Bible, and on the way to reconstruct these or reenact the times of the glorious past. There is no inhibitions, definitely not international law, not human rights or civil rights, as we have seen in their actions in Gaza and now in the West Bank. But this is really something that is beyond kind of cold calculations of strategy and tactics. We have to take very seriously that we are dealing now with the political elite with a messianic perspective, and therefore we should not expect them to respect laws of war or any other inhibitions that we thought that the international community somehow was able to produce after the Second World War, as far as military engagements between states or states and non-states organizations are concerned.
Luca, there used to be distaste in the US, as you've said, and a global taboo about the idea of assassination. In fact, there was even an executive order, first from President Gerald Ford, which in some form I think still exists, which says no employee of the US government shall engage in political assassination. But do you think that queasiness about this tactic disappeared after 9/11 in what they called the global war on terror?
I wouldn't necessarily think that 9/11 is a necessary turning point. I think US government efforts to circumvent or undermine the ban on assassination that you just mentioned already started in the 1980s under Reagan. And as early as 1986, the United States conducted, in collaboration with Israeli intelligence, an operation against Gaddafi's compound, the bombing of Gaddafi's compound, to try and kill him. This wasn't successful. But then again, in the 1990s, at the start of the Gulf War, they conducted a similar raid against Saddam Hussein. So assassination, even before 9/11, was part of the US arsenal, either as part of regime change or as part of broader conflicts. You're right, this has escalated after 9/11, when the United States joined with Israel into the so-called targeted killing game, in particular against terrorists. And I think we saw two further escalations, one under the first Trump administration, in which the infrastructure of targeted killings was used against a state official, Qasem Soleimani, in an attack in a third country. And then the Khamenei strike, I think, which is a further and perhaps the most dangerous escalation that has seen the successful targeting of a state official and a state leader in this case at the start of the war.
Rami, can I take you back to 1997? As you know, repeatedly Hamas leaders were killed by Israel, assassinated. Back in 1997 in Amman, Jordan, Khalid Mashal, leader of Hamas, was in Jordan, and Israeli agents, disguised as Canadian tourists, fired poison into his ear. He was dying in a coma. King Hussein, the then king of Jordan, went to Bill Clinton, the US president, said, you've got to do something. President Clinton then forced the then Israeli prime minister, one Benjamin Netanyahu, to provide the antidote. I mean, you think about that now and what the US is doing with Israel in Iran right now, it seems very different.
Yes, it does. And I was there, and I met Khalid Mashal shortly after that when he recovered for an interview, and he was even more determined than ever to keep on doing the resistance, political and military and cultural resistance to Israel's occupation. So, I mean, it was striking to see him so vehement, so energetic, having such survived an assassination attempt. So that's the death doesn't scare these people very much. They're prepared for it. They're willing to risk it. But the American role, I think, was fascinating. But more important was King Hussein himself directly telling the Israelis that if they don't send the antidote to the poison, he's going to break the peace treaty. They'll end their relationship. So the actions of Arab leaders, I think, can have a role in this. But what we've seen in the last 30, 40 years is really the lack of sovereignty or determination or ability by Arab leaders and governments to act forcefully to confront Israel. And the two examples that have worked with Israel are the Egyptian and Jordanian peace treaties that created a permanent peace that has held despite popular opposition, because both sides, the Israelis and the Arab sides, got their legal rights. And the Israelis don't seem to want to do this. And the Americans are totally now giving Israel anything it wants to do. There's a little divergence between them on strategy and tactics in Iran, but probably not very much. And in the long run, this is what Netanyahu is counting on.
Ilan, let me ask you about the strategy and the tactics and the aims of the Israelis and the US, because President Trump has given so many different aims for this war at various points. But one thing he said is that he'd like to find a Venezuelan model. Following his removal of Maduro, he effectively put the Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez in power, keeping the system intact. How are you going to find an Iranian Delcy if you keep taking out all of the Iranian leadership one by one?
Well, I don't think it is a coherent strategy as far as Trump is concerned, or even as far as Israel is concerned in that sense. Namely, the way that the attacks on Iran unfold show you that the implications, for instance, to the petrol, gas, and oil economy were not at all taken into account. It was very clear that all this talk about regime change was a hollow talk because there was not really any plan or clear plan. What is the connection between bombing the Iranians to death and changing the regime? I think we shouldn't put too much behind these plans beyond tactics. Tactics to create, in the case of Israel, deterrence, a sense of invincibility after a very unsuccessful attempt to defeat both Hamas and Hezbollah in the last 2.5 years, a prime minister that wants a war in order to hopefully, from his perspective, to win the next elections, an American president that looks for distraction from his own domestic issues. It's terrible that these more petty considerations, together with what I called before the Israeli messianic ideology, are leading to that much of destruction. In many ways, you can say that the lack of any effect of the political assassination on the realities on the ground, namely on the determination of people under occupation to continue their resistance, very much like the assassination themselves, the whole war itself of the last 13 or 14 days is not going to change anything fundamentally in terms of the challenges that facing all those which are involved in the war, whether it's President Trump in his American domestic politics, whether it's Israel's relationship with the Palestinians and with Lebanon, and whether it's the Iranian people and their relationship with their regime. I mean, we are seeing all this firepower, all these expenses that go along with these military operations, and the damage and the inhumanity that goes with it. And we know it from the last round, which was just a few months ago, that the reality remains the same. And that's really worrying, because it means that there is something in the regional and international system that allows this kind of insanity, this kind of brutality to be repeated again and again in very short intervals. And this is something that really the international community should really consider, and not just the assassination themselves, but assassination are symptoms of the kind of policies that America and Israel are pursuing in the region, that is only aggravating existing predicaments and problems, and really threatens not only the stability of the Middle East, but of the international community as a whole.
Luca, very quickly, I mean, it is Israel, we think, that is carrying out most of these assassination operations. You've written a book, though, called The President's Kill List. Would you assume that President Trump is being consulted each time and told of the target list?
I think it was certainly consulted, and it was also very clear in suggesting that U.S. forces and intelligence had taken part in the raid against Khamenei. As other contributors have suggested, I think there is an emerging discrepancy here between perhaps Trump's wishful thinking or maybe willingness to do a deal along the Venezuela precedent and Israel continuous campaign of decapitation that might be going against U.S. interest in a sense that it is eliminating leaders that the United States might be looking at as potential to make a deal. Just to be clear, I don't particularly think that such a deal would be particularly feasible, especially since all the war and the campaigns of assassination seem to actually have strengthened the regime, as the intelligence community had warned Trump that they would do. So I don't think he is probably consultant or given a green light for all Israeli operations, but he certainly was at the center of the start of the war and the strike against Khamenei.
Luca Trenta, Ilan Pape and Rami Khoury, thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Remember, for further extensive coverage of the war with plenty of context and analysis, check out our website, aljazeera.com. We like to hear your thoughts too. Why not go to our Facebook page? That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or find us on X. There we are at AJ Inside Story for now. That's it from me, James Bays, and the Inside Story team. Stay tuned for the very latest coming up in just a moment.
That would precipitate an attack against American forces.
To prevent Iran from getting nukes.
There is no coherent strategy, and you can see that's reflected in the media coverage.
Many American media see it like a video game. From the graphics on the screen to who they speak to, war for them is big business.
We saw this exact same pattern happen in Gaza, the same lazy, flattened reporting that we saw in Gaza when it comes to the war on Iran.
The Listening Post decodes the media on Al Jazeera.
In today's agricultural market, when fertiliser is available and how much it costs is beyond a farmer's control. So Lachlan Mac Smith is stockpiling everything he can.
I've been here 73 years. I've never seen fuel price and fertiliser go up so quickly at such a critical time.
The Middle East is a major supplier of urea, the main chemical widely used as a fertiliser, and Australia imports most of its supplies. Shipping delays in the Strait of Hormuz have led to price increases. Farmers here tell us it's already spiked by 20%. Higher fuel prices are compounding the situation, with each livestock feed delivery more expensive than the last. Farmers here are often described as the backbone of the Australian economy, and so the pressures felt here could ripple through the supply chain, with warnings the entire food industry could be at risk.
It is 18 GMT, 9 p.m. here in Doha, 9:30 in Tehran. This is Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the US and Israeli attacks on Iran. I'm Adrian Finnegan. The latest this hour. Qatar calls Iranian strikes on its gas facilities a dangerous escalation. Energy prices have surged following the attack on the world's largest LNG export facility. Iran keeps targeting Israel. Missiles hit an oil refinery in the northern port city of Haifa. Israeli officials contradict President Donald Trump's claim that the US didn't know about its plan to attack Iran's South Pars gas field. And Trump meets with Japan's prime minister as he continues to pressure allies to assist in securing the Strait of Hormuz.
Has the US failed to protect its Gulf allies? On This Is America, we look at the limitations of the US security shield and how the trust of Gulf nations is being shaken.
20 days into the Iran conflict, oil and gas infrastructure across the region is increasingly under threat. Global energy prices have surged after Israeli forces struck Iran's South Pars gas field on Wednesday, prompting Iran to retaliate with attacks on energy facilities across the Gulf. Iran's army says that it will completely destroy the energy sites of US allies in the region if its own facilities are attacked again. Qatar says there is extensive damage at Ras Laffan, the world's largest liquefied natural gas export facility, after Iran's overnight attacks. And Qatar's Prime Minister, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, says that Iran has destroyed the nation's trust with its aggression.
This war needs to stop immediately. The aggression needs to stop immediately. Because everyone knows who is the big beneficiary of the war and dragging the whole region into this conflict. Unfortunately, what is happening now is serving those agendas.
Al Jazeera is live this hour from the White House in Washington, near Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, and Tehran. But first, let's go to Dmitry Medvedenko, who's here in Doha. Dmitry, in the last 24 hours, Iran targeted or hit energy sites in the UAE, Saudi, Kuwait, and Qatar. How much damage do they do?
They've done extensive damage was the first adjective we heard. We have now numbers, Adrian, that go with that adjective. The CEO of Qatar Energy, that's Saad Al-Kabi, has spoken to Reuters news agency. And he has said that 17% of the country's LNG, liquefied natural gas exports, have been rendered offline, basically. This is going to cost billions of dollars, and not just in repair costs to the facilities that were damaged in the Ras Laffan complex, but also in the revenue that is not going to be received by the country because of the 17% of the exports that's been affected. $20 billion a year. And this is not a lump sum. This is a year for several years. It's going to disrupt LNG supplies to the world. Qatar is one of the largest LNG suppliers in the whole world. And it is already affecting not just short-term exports, because the country has effectively stopped exporting LNG because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't have alternatives to bypass the Strait of Hormuz when it comes to its energy exports. It's also now saying that it may have to declare force majeure on long-term contracts, 3 to 5 years, when it comes to LNG supplies to countries including Belgium, Italy, South Korea, and China. This is having major implications, obviously, for the energy market as well as for Qatar Energy and the country, Qatar, as a whole. And the CEO of Qatar Energy has said that these attacks, just this one series of attacks on Ras Laffan, has set back the region by 10 to 20 years, Adrian.
Dimitri, in addition to closing the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is also attacking any ability to reroute energy. How is it doing that?
Well, there's only 3 countries in the whole region, not just the Gulf, but the general region of the Persian Gulf, which have alternatives to the Strait of Hormuz, which has effectively now been blocked by Iran. These are Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iraq in a very limited capacity. I'll get to that in a second. So Saudi Arabia has a pipeline called the East-West Pipeline that delivers oil from some of its major facilities to the port of Yanbu in the Red Sea. Now, it's been using that port in the past couple of weeks, trying to hire freighters to deliver oil. Obviously, it's limited compared to its Strait of Hormuz export capacities, but we've learned that in the past 24 hours, the port of Yanbu has also been targeted in attacks, causing some minor damage and disrupting those exports for a short while. Now, the UAE has another pipeline that takes oil from some of its major facilities in the west of the country to the east coast, which is basically on the coast of the Gulf of Oman, so bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. Fujairah port is what it's called, and it's come under attack at least 3 times in these past couple of weeks. And finally, we have Iraq, which has a limited pipeline going to Turkey, but its exports have already, through that pipeline, been affected even prior to this conflict.
Dmitry Medvedenko reporting live from Doha. Many thanks indeed, Dmitry. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps says that it targeted oil refineries in the Israeli port cities of Haifa and Ashdod. Israel's energy minister said that a fire broke out in Haifa, causing some damage, but that power was restored. Initial assessments showed part of an Iranian cluster munition hit the refinery. Tehran said the attack was in retaliation for an Israeli strike on their facilities in the South Pars gas field. Live now to Noor Odeh, who's just outside Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Noor, this strike on the Israeli city of Haifa and the one on Ashdod, do we know what was hit?
Well, we know, Adrian, that in Haifa, the oil refinery and the electricity company were hit. Now, this is very significant because the oil refinery in the Haifa Bay is responsible for 60 to 70% of the supply in the Israeli market. It goes through tens of thousands of barrels a day. And so that is a very strategic location. There were power outages recorded in Haifa, and the Minister of Energy in Israel said that work was underway to repair that damage. We do not know all the sites where damage was reported because, again, the military sensor controls that kind of information, but it's difficult to kind of obscure the fire that resulted from those 2 impact sites in Haifa. Now, this is in the context of increasing lethality of the Israeli missiles, which continue to hit Israeli cities and towns sounds, Adrian, at all hours of the day and night. And that is related to the kind of missiles that Iran is using. It is using heavier missiles, missiles that travel at supersonic speed, and many that have cluster warheads that splinter into many missiles that cover a radius of up to 10 kilometers. It is very difficult to intercept, very difficult to eliminate the threat from those missiles, even with Israel's multi-layered, highly sophisticated air defense system.
All right, stay with us, Noor. I'll be back with you in just a moment, but I want to bring in Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim, who's live for us in Iran's capital, Tehran. The IRGC has confirmed that attack. What else have they been saying today?
Well, the IRGC announced that they've attacked the refineries in Israel, Haifa and Ashdod. However, there's also an announcement, significant one, that they've hit an F-35 American jet above Iran. If this is, I mean, there are, from the other side, the confirmations that there is an incident that took place. Now, for the Iranians, they've published a video showing the moment this plane was targeted. If this is accurate, then this is maybe the first time the F-35 is being hit in action. The IRGC also said that they've activated for the first time a new weapon that they've acquired or developed after the 12 days war. So for now, these are the main lines from the IRGC with respect to their operations. More attacks on Israel, more launches were recorded during the day. Also, on the other side, there have been several airstrikes. We're hearing of an airstrike now towards the south of Tehran, but we don't know the details or the accurate target. However, we just heard the news of that.
All right, Ali, many thanks indeed. Ali Hashim there, live in Tehran. Israeli officials say that Wednesday's strike on Iran's South Pars gas facility was, quote, coordinated with the US, but is unlikely to be repeated. That's despite US President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social that Washington had no prior knowledge of the attack. Iran responded with strikes on energy installations across the Gulf. Back to Noor O'Day, who is just outside Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. There's a direct contradiction here, Noor, between Trump and Israel on this attack. What are we to make of that?
Well, I mean, as far as the Israeli commentary is concerned, President Trump will say whatever President Trump wants to say, but the Israelis are adamant. This strike, which they consider to be very strategic, Adrian, happened with U.S. coordination and consent, because even operationally, Israel cannot send warplanes to that active war space without the U.S. knowing about it, because then there would be a risk to the fighters and the pilots involved. So at least at the operational level, this is just impossible. And again, Israel understood that this was a dramatic, a very significant development when it hit the Pars gas field, and it said so. The officials who announced it, the senior officials in the government who announced it, said so. Now the messaging from Israel is, for now, Israel won't repeat that because we want it to be a message to Tehran. And it seems that Tehran is getting the message. It's really not clear what kind of message Tehran is supposed to get out of that. But for now, when Haifa is also attacked, and with the U.S. president kind of disavowing and disowning this whole incident, it seems that at least for now, Israel doesn't plan on attacking more of those strategic sites in the coming days.
Reporting live from the occupied West Bank. Many thanks indeed, Noor. The International Maritime Organization wants to see the creation of a safe shipping corridor in the Gulf to evacuate stranded ships and sailors. The UN body held an emergency meeting in London to try to assist 20,000 seafarers on over 3,000 vessels that are stranded west of the Strait of Hormuz. Let's bring in journalist Intamam Rashid, who is in position overlooking the strait. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, it's still very quiet here, Adrian. Not many ships are passing through the Strait of Hormuz because we know that Iran still has de facto control over these waters. And just in the last 24 hours, we've seen 2 vessels in these waters be targeted by Iranian weaponry, whether it was missiles or drones. They have been struck and those vessels have both caught fire. So clearly these are still very dangerous and perilous waters, despite what the International Maritime Organization have said today. They have demanded that Iran immediately refrain from any actions or threats aimed at closing, obstructing, or otherwise interfering with international navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. It also reaffirmed that the exercise of navigational rights and freedoms by merchant and commercial vessels must be respected. There are hundreds and hundreds of vessels currently anchored down on these waters behind me. If I just move out the way, Adrian, you may actually be able to see, and I'll turn off my light, you may be able to see some lights in the distance there. They are dozens and dozens of vessels, ships, oil tankers, cargo ships waiting to pass through. Usually around 20% of the world's oil passes through these waters. That's been hugely reduced ever since this conflict began and Iran took military control of this waterway. Now, Iranian oil is passing through. We know that it's heading to the likes of China, but the IMO today announcing that they want to try and work with organizations, countries, to try and forge some form of safe passage through these waters. The likelihood of that happening is very limited. We know that US President Donald Trump has said he wants to essentially put together some form of global coalition to bring Navy vessels to these waters and actually try and get vessels moving through. Again, the likelihood of that happening is also very slim because he's been rejected by a number of countries. He had a very awkward encounter with the Japanese premier today in the Oval Office. Of course, she was one of the countries that had rejected the support to Donald Trump in bringing warships to these waters. So right here on the Strait of Hormuz, Iran still very much has a chokehold over the world economy. Yes, we're seeing a number of energy facilities around the Gulf still be targeted, of course, in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, here in the UAE as well. And that has affected the oil prices around the world. But it's here really where that impact is really being the full effect around the world of the oil prices. We're seeing fuel prices in a number of countries increasing. We're seeing food prices as well going up because a lot of fertilizer is stuck on these waters. For now, even with the conflict escalating over the last 24 hours, Adrian, and reaching, I think, new levels in this war, it's relatively quiet here on these waters. But quiet shipping lanes means that it will have huge impact around the world. And I think when vessels and seafarers out in those waters behind me, thousands and thousands of them are living in fear because they don't know if they could be attacked next. We also don't know in terms of supplies what they are getting. And we're seeing many ships make a decision to turn around, to try and find different routes and to try and stay away from what is now a very dangerous and a very perilous Strait of Hormuz. Adrian.
Inzamam, many thanks indeed. Inzamam Rashid reporting there. As Inzamam just mentioned, Japan's Prime Minister is holding talks on the Iran war with Donald Trump in Washington. Sanae Takaichi condemned Iran's attacks on regional neighbours and confirmed that they've been trying to reach out to Tehran over the disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. Tokyo is among several allies that Donald Trump says have been reluctant to assist in securing the Strait of Hormuz.
I expect Japan to step up because, you know, we have that kind of relationship, and we step up for Japan. Japan, China, Europe, parts of Europe get a lot of their oil through the strait. We get none, practically. We're less than 1%. We don't have to be any percent. We don't even, I think we do it just to be nice. But we think of it, we don't use the strait. We're defending the strait for everybody else. And then in the case of NATO, they don't want to help us defend the strait, and they're the ones that need it.
Live to Washington at our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. What are both sides hoping to get out of this meeting, Kimberly?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the United States and Japan, there is the one shared goal, and that is reopening the Strait of Hormuz, effectively closed from this conflict. But beyond that, their priorities really diverge. In terms of the United States, it is looking to degrade Iran's military capabilities, its missiles, its navy as well. It's really just looking to ensure that, in the words of Donald Trump, that it's not a threat to the region later on. But when it comes to Japan, there's more of an economic focus. This is about trying to make sure that there is oil that continues to flow, but at the same time, it's also about avoiding a military entanglement. And so what we saw in the Oval Office is the Prime Minister, Takaichi, really looking and using wording carefully in terms of trying to bring about a de-escalation, talking to President Trump about he could achieve peace and harmony. Of course, that involves him making the choice to do so. So it was clear that the Prime Minister was trying to keep relations with the United States on good ground, but at the same time, the friction between those two allies was certainly noticeable.
All right, Kimberly, many thanks indeed. Our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett, reporting live from Washington. With us once again in the studio is Ross Harrison, a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and author of Decoding Iran's Foreign Policy. And joining us, Abdullah Bandar al-Ataibi, who's an assistant professor in international affairs at Qatar University. Welcome, both of you. Ross, let's start with you. Donald Trump says he knew nothing about Israel's strike on Iran's South Pars gas field. And yet, as we were reporting earlier, Israel suggests that the US may have been well aware. Does that mean that Israel is out of control, it's acting independently, or is the president lying?
Well, I'm not sure Israel's out of control, but I think what you're seeing is different sorts of pressure being applied to each of these allies. You know, Adrian, the longer the war goes on, the more distance could occur between the United States and Israel. And the United States is getting most of the global pressure because of the economic consequences in Qatar and in Kuwait, across the region. And we saw it with the Japanese prime minister. So the U.S. is getting the pressure globally, they're getting the pressure domestically. Israel is not. Israel has a regional perspective, a regional set of interests, and the war is very popular there. So whether he's lying or not lying, I can't comment on that. But what I can say is the longer the war goes on, the greater the opportunity for deviation.
Well, what would be the strategic logic in denying it?
I think the strategic logic would be to suggest that the United States might be interested in some de-escalation. Because if, in fact, this was a combined U.S. and Israeli effort, it's that the U.S. is not ready to negotiate, is not ready to de-escalate, is behind the Israeli assassination of their leaders. So I think it could be a good cop, bad cop kind of a strategy. I don't know how much messaging coordination there was, Adrian, but I think it indicates, and I think it's normal. I mean, even during the Second World War, the United States and Great Britain, the longer the war went on, there was more deviation of mission and so forth. And that's what you worry about between two allies that are working in lockstep. Very early stages were in concert with one another, similar missions, and now you start to see some kind of deviation. The U.S. might be interested in solving this problem. Israel may be more likely to persist in bringing the regime down.
Abdullah, Israel strikes Iran's South Pars gas field. Iran responds by hitting Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG hub. Are we now in a full-scale energy war here?
Well, that's a disastrous consequences, actually, Adrian. When you look at targeting energy, this is unacceptable at all, and this was actually a reckless step by whoever by all actually actors. Here we talk about Israel targeting the Iranian energy facility. We saw actually Iranian retaliate by attacking the Gulf, Qatar, Ras Laffan. Also, we saw Saudis, the Kuwaiti energy infrastructure. This is unacceptable at all. This is pushing the region into more of a chaos. This is actually a conflict on a threat, a big threat on global interest, because we talk about energy here, and this is actually, first of all, this is the source of income for many countries here in the region. It's also a source of energy and electricity for a huge number of people in the world. We talk about 30% of the UK electricity comes from Qatar, and how about other countries? The list goes on and on.
So striking the world's largest LNG export hub changes the strategic stakes
Well, definitely. This is because now energy is no longer a collateral damage. It's actually the major target of these actors. Now you see Iran and Israel, they are targeting the energy, and this is causing disruption in global security, global energy security and global security as well. But we should not actually rule out the environment-related issues with that, because we talk about energy. This could lead to a lot of environmental disruption and damage in the region. We talk about a region where millions of thousands of tons of fish being produced every single year. We talk about shrimps, we talk about biodiversity in general, and this is actually being put on the line now by these attacks.
Ross, the Pentagon says that it's hit thousands of targets inside Iran, and yet Iran still retains, obviously, strike capability. Are those claims compatible?
I think they are. Because I think there's also, I don't know whether they're going after their drone capacity, their underground drones. We don't really know. But I think what's important for the viewers, Adrian, is that in many ways, Israel and Iran are scaling up from strategies that they have developed over the years. So Israel had an assassination strategy. Yeah, they attacked Iranian scientists. But for the most part, they were going after non-state actors with an assassination because they believed there was no diplomacy available. Now they've scaled that up. And Iran's strategy was to work sort of a guerrilla strategy, working with their militias in the region and put indirect pressure on Israel. Now what's happening is they've taken the guerrilla strategy and regionalized and brought it above ground. And now they're attacking the Gulf Arab states. And I think it's probably a difficult thing for the Iranians to do in a way because they know they have to live in this region. But I think what they're trying to do is do it to create enough pain that eventually put pressure on Donald Trump. And some of the comments we've seen today might indicate that we see the early stages of that, but it's too early to tell.
When this is all over, it's too early to talk about it being over. Maybe we're closer to the end of the hot stage of this war than we are to the end of the conflict. How will Gulf nations look at their allegiances in the region and beyond?
Allegiances. We talk about networks of relationships here in the region. It's hard to talk about it, Adrian, at the moment, but definitely there will be a big review of all the allegiances, a big review of all the relationships in the region, especially with geography. Geography is a destiny. You can't change geography overnight, and you can't actually move your country to another place, basically. So you definitely have to deal with it. You have to look at the common ground and the interests we have. We have one of the biggest LNG fields in the world that's shared between Qatar and Iran. There are economic interests as well between these two countries, between Qatar and Iran, and so UAE and Iran. So these common interests should prevail. But for this to actually happen, Iran should stop attacking. And for this, for the Gulf countries to activate their diplomatic channels to stop this war. This is, Adrian, I believe it's basically a war based on a balance of power in the region. You have the Iranian project, you have the Israeli projects, and both of them are pushing for domination in the region. And this is the time where they clash, but this is a clash that brings the whole region to chaos. Therefore, the good idea is we have to calm down, relax, activate diplomatic channels, and we should stop that for the sake of the people in the region and also for the global interest.
Ross, what do you make of that? Are nations at the moment talking with Iran? Are there any diplomatic channels open right now?
Well, I think one of the things we want to look at is also, I think there's a certain amount of bargaining that is taking place on the battlefield. Bargaining can take place negotiation take place in a room, but bargaining can take place and I think there are certain signals we're seeing today. One of the most fascinating things I saw today was Foreign Minister Aghashi of Iran saying that they could go further. They were listening to some of the voices in the region. Perhaps they were creating some kind of a perception that maybe they were open to some kind of eventual de-escalation with the Gulf Arab states. But I think the other piece of that we saw was it could have also been a veiled threat, that if we're attacked further, we could escalate. If we're showing some restraint now, it doesn't seem like in Qatar we've got much restraint, given what happened last night at the Ras Laffan plant. But so it's really hard to see. But I think we should be looking for verbal signals from the battlefield, and then trying to think about where some of the negotiating positions might be on each side.
Ross Harrison, Abdullah Bandar El Ataibi, many thanks indeed for being with us. We'll no doubt speak again in the coming hours.
Thanks, Adrian.
As we were saying just now, the US Pentagon has been giving a briefing on the progress in the war on Iran. Speaking alongside Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, Dan Kane, said that Iran's missile capability has not run out.
They came into this fight with a lot of weapons. This is why we continue to be as aggressive and assertive as we can against their ballistic missile capability, both their medium-range ballistic missile capability and their short-range missile capability. So we are continuing to hunt and find them and kill them, and we will continue to do so. So they still retain some capability. And we have layered defenses throughout the region that will allow us to protect those, and we're working with our partners across the Gulf region to help them improve any defensive capabilities that they may need.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says that the US is winning the war with Iran decisively and on Washington's terms. In the Pentagon media briefing, he was asked whether the US had prior knowledge of Israel's attack on Iran's South Pars gas field.
We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We have allies pursuing objectives as well. And the truth speaks for itself. I mean, President Trump was very clear about that. Iran has weaponized energy for decades. Israel clearly sent a warning, and POTUS has made it clear, very clear. Iran knows when you hit Karg Island and you hit military capabilities on Karg Island, which is the only thing we hit, we can hold anything at issue, anything. The United States military controls the fate of that country. Iran has the ability to make the right choices. It should not, going forward, target Arab allies, Arab countries, trying to create pain, the pain that they created themselves.
Lebanon's electricity authority says that an Israeli attack put a main substation out of service in the south of the country. The strikes in Bint Jbeil damaged parts of the station, impacting power in the city and surrounding towns. The Israeli army has been routinely hitting state infrastructure and residential areas. Lebanon's health ministry says that more than 1,000 people have been killed and more than 1 million others displaced since the conflict with Hezbollah resumed on March the 2nd. This is Al Jazeera, live from Doha. Let's remind you of the main developments this hour. Energy prices have